Balkan Mountains, but in the low mountains, so around 400 meters above sea level. And I live here with my wife, who's from Portugal. And we have, since having built the house here, which there's another story behind that, it was eBay, we have invested all of our time, energy and money into animal care, dogs and cats. I was in the logistics environment for around 15 years and then moved into the manufacturing supply chain environment up until I was in my mid-40s. So I didn't join the teaching party till I was already grey. I mean, I've been building teams, delivering training, improving or trying to improve, because not every story is a success, improving operational approaches in different countries across the world since the late 1990s. I've been teaching for about 6 years. In terms of training, I've been doing that for 20 something years. Pretty much everyone who I meet has a different story to tell and different weaknesses and strengths and so on. So it's extremely important, first of all, to get a relationship. Who is this person? What do they think they need, which is the one question, and what do they actually need, which is the other question. And the most important thing, in my opinion, is building a relationship. Humans connect with humans. So you can read in 1,000 books the right way to teach, and step 1, step 2, step 3. But at the end of the day, if you've got no connection, all of those steps are kind of irrelevant. And not least dealing with adults in a business setting, it's important to find common threads of understanding. So if I'm sitting with a supply chain manager, I can talk in a language that a supply chain manager is going to understand. And if I'm sitting in a room with a supply chain manager, but they don't want to talk about supply chain, I can also find commonalities in our personalities, which allow me then to deliver an experience of language learning. So it's all about finding that common link. There's something that Wefit does, which is not shared by any other platform that I've ever worked with, and that is they start the process with the learners by doing a psychometric test in order to understand, are they introverted, are they extroverted, and what kind of ways do they learn. And there's only really 4 primary ways that people absorb information. It's either visual, verbal, in a studious way in logical terms, or kinetic, which is a mixture of all. Now, one thing that Wefit does very well, and certainly far exceeds my expectations as a trainer, is they kind of do this at the start. Now, what does that do? And what that gives me as a stranger coming into a room, meeting somebody, is first of all, I understand what level they're at, broadly speaking, on a written and a listening test. Second of all, I already have an idea of their profile in terms of who they work for and their role in that business. And then thirdly, I see that from this psychometric testing process, the way in which they best take information. So, for example, I can be happy and jump around like a lunatic with my hands in the air, but that's going to do absolutely nothing good for an introverted learner. So that's where I would then need to change my approach. For an introverted learner, it's about a quiet conversation, staying methodical in terms of the approach, and making promises that you keep, because an introvert will take mental note of what's been promised and will prefer to take a passenger role in order to build a relationship. Whereas an extroverted learner wants to see animation and wants to see a little bit of crazy in the room in order to feel more comfortable. And they primarily like to take the driving seat. Then I become the passenger. But the whole time guiding them. I'm the passenger, but I'm also holding the road map, so I'm showing them which way to turn. From Wefit's perspective, the key is to maintain integrity. If you're going to make a promise, do it. If it succeeds or if it fails, that's depending on both parties' engagement. But if you're going to make a promise, do it. If we have many different types of students with many different types of extremely qualified trainers, both from a corporate perspective and from a teaching perspective, and a mixture of both. And what we do is quite simply see who's in the room, judge what we think they need from a language point of view, and then allow them to help us design the path to get there. She started that, as an example, she started that, I think, on a 20-hour program. But every single aspect of learning the language, and in this case, English from her perspective, was already embedded. She was already conditioned to understand what that means based on her younger experience at school. So for her, school was boring. Everything that she did at school was boring in relative terms to language learning. And she had no other experience of learning or having a language training package delivered to her in any other way except that one experience. She needed a good mixture of structure, because that's the way her brain was wired up. She needed the structure, the framework, but she needed that mixed up with some informality in terms of structure. So at the end, we were doing 50-50 lessons. Here's the structure. This is the stuff I need you to look at for next week. And then next week, when we join, right now, let's do half of this lesson based on the stuff that you needed to look at last week. And then going through the tricks, tips, the ways, the mistakes, and so on. And then using that as a platform to have an open conversation. So let's make a presumption, for example, that the lesson was about using the past tense. So the first part of the follow-up lesson would be those exercises. The next part would be, what did you do at the weekend? You went to what party? How amazing was that party? Who did you meet there? I met. Informal verb. I met blah, blah, blah. Sorry, irregular verb, not informal verb. I met so-and-so. Did you meet so-and-so? You did meet. And what did you do then? And just by this repetition and this approach, she felt relaxed. She sat there and she renewed her training program 2 more times as well before moving on. And she moved on, and it was kind of a highlight for me, to be honest with you, because she was in tears. She didn't want to stop the training. She wanted she wanted to continue. And this was from somebody who started her training with, I'm just wasting my time here. So that's a major success for people who do this kind of thing. Myself and all of the other trainers, we don't get paid in euros and cents. We get paid in seeing the development and sharing in the success and the wins of people's personal development. And you can really, when you're having one-on-one lessons, you can really feel that when you care about doing this, it's not about money. It's about, how can I move this person from this position up to this position, and how can we make that happen together? Now, some people need that framework in order to move. If you give somebody who is relatively introverted 0 framework, they get lost, because in order for them to be able to participate on any journey, they need to see where it starts and where it ends, and in which street they're walking right now. If you have none of that, they're lost. But then there are the other extremes. Some people, if you have any of that, it's detrimental to them. It's a negative for them. They just want to feel like they are engaging. And that's the skill of the trainer, is to participate in that engagement, but mentally, when I'm participating in that engagement in a language lesson, I'm also thinking about, okay, now we need to move on to here, but we need to make it natural. We need to make it feel like they're moving on there, and then invite them at a point in the future to repeat that discussion in their own words, in their own way, using different kinds of discussion elements, just to understand, okay, they've got it, we can move on. Oh, they haven't got it. Okay, then I'm going to have to push this a little bit harder. Yeah. So, but it is very much the skill of the trainer, the skill of, and there are some absolutely fantastic, skilled individuals working with Wefit. Some are better at some aspects than others, like any walk of life. But generally speaking, we all aim to make sure that every lesson is adapted to the style and the wishes of the learner, but always with the primary prerequisite, the primary situation that it's their company that's buying the lessons. So their company has an objective, and the more we understand about that objective, the closer we can get to delivering exactly what their objective is. So we kind of got to behave like psychologists in a way, because it's a therapy session in some ways for the learner in language terms, but at the same time, manipulating, modifying, molding it into a package which also delivers whatever the company is paying for. The German guy was communicating in the early days of email with an intranet system, was communicating with the Dutch guy, and they had kind of opposite positions in a transport planning environment. But every single time the German guy wrote a sentence, he was using an exclamation mark. The Dutch guy thought he was shouting at him, because in Dutch, as it is in English, normally you use an exclamation mark to raise the tone, raise the voice, and if you use capital letters in combination with that, then you really are shouting. But in Germany, it's kind of slightly different now, but in Germany, in the German language, the exclamation mark, the Ausrufezeichen, is used to underline the importance of something, as opposed to making it personalized to whomever you're addressing in the broadest context. So these two guys were kind of ready to fight simply because of a misunderstanding in these terms, in language terms, but it's cultural misunderstanding. I have always included that in my lessons with Germans, that experience, because it really defines how such a small thing can make such a huge difference in terms of communication. So yeah, that's one of them.